Hello. It's been some time since I uploaded a video on here. I think it was, I look evil. Hello. I have returned from the deep recesses of wherever. Now I've still been watching loads and loads of movies, but my last movie review was, I think it was the Jackie Chan video. I mean, I guess I can give a quick rundown of new films I've watched. I watched Jolt. It's pretty bad. I watched Kate. It's also pretty bad. And that's it. That's all I've watched that's new. But this is not a movie review video, unlike so many others I have done. This video is about reading, because recently I have started reading again, and it's not an exaggeration to say that, because there was a good 4, maybe 5 year gap where I barely read a word. School sort of completely put me off reading. Anyway, so I'm just going to sort of run through all the books I've read lately. I mean, as I've been reading them, I've been putting them in this box so I can swap them out on the shelf for ones I've not read yet. And the box is half full at this point. I'm sort of blasting through books lately. So I guess I'll just go right to left. So the first book in here, one of the 2 smaller ones, yeah, 2, is Down and Out in Paris and London by George Orwell, who everyone knows, I think, from 1984, which is a book I've not read, because the way my interest lies, I didn't necessarily want to read 1984. But this book sounded very interesting to me. Just George Orwell sort of explaining about how it's bad to be poor, with some degree of graphic detail. But I really like this book. I finished it quite quickly. It's not too long. It's a little bit one note, being that it's basically like a biography of sorts, but it's sort of captivating in its misery, and I really enjoyed it. It makes me want to read 1984, which when I picked this up I didn't want to do, so maybe one day. The next book I read was a book by Ernest Hemingway. I've read a little, well, I just got rid of bright outside. Ernest Hemingway. I've read a little bit of Hemingway before, but this is sort of the first one I've picked up and read end to end, and it's a book of short stories. I think there's maybe 10 short stories in here, 15 short stories in here. Overall it was decent. I think some of the stories were really good. I really liked the killers, and that's the only one I remember by name. There was probably 4 or 5 stories in this that I really liked, and the rest was pretty bland. Hemingway has a bit of an obsession with bullfighting and bull rings, which isn't really of interest to me. But yeah, overall I'd say it was a pretty decent read. Nice printing. This was recommended to me by a friend. It's a classic novel. I've seen, I think, the BBC show adaptation of it from years ago, and that is Day of the Triffids by John Wyndham. Surprisingly very good book, but not necessarily. Let me see if I can get the focus on it. Yeah, so surprisingly, actually a very good book. I really enjoyed reading this book. as far as apocalypse stories go, and I've not read that many, so I'm not an authority figure on this, but it was sort of endlessly captivating because of the character rather than because of everyone on Earth being killed by plants. This is sort of, I think, what M. Night Shyamalan was trying to do in The Happening, but that completely fails where this thrives. And there's quite a lot of interesting sort of politics going on in this book, which usually would be something I'd like try and avoid, but I actually really like this book. It's a cool cover as well. But yeah, so I recommend Day of the Triffids. I'll put a score at the end or something. I have been sort of doing small reviews of them as I go through on my Instagram. But so the next book I read was another big one I've been meaning to get to for a long time, and it's Isaac Asimov's Foundation, which I have 2 different copies of. This is the newer copy because I didn't mind too much about like properly breaking it in, and it annoyed me that it had the Apple TV Plus show sticker on it. But as far as the book goes, I'll get the other cover actually. As far as this is the other cover, it's much nicer in my opinion. It's very old, it's my dad's copy, so the spine is like eviscerated. But I really enjoyed this book while understanding that it's perfectly reasonable to hate it. It's constantly sort of jumping through time, which I think could annoy some people, especially if you get attached to the characters, which at first, I think the first little chunk the characters were great, and then as it went on it was sort of more about the ideas than the characters. And I think the best way to read this book is almost as if it's a series of shorts that just happen to be in the same place, rather than trying to read it linear end to end. But I really like this book, and I have all the other ones, so hopefully I'll go through them at some point. They're quite nice and short, despite certain moments being very difficult to read. There's a certain part where a character never pronounces R's, and trying to read that bit is very difficult because you sort of have to read ahead of your brain. I'm trying to find it, but I can't find it right now. But yeah, I recommend Foundation for sci-fi fans, but I recommend reading it with the presumption it's a bunch of shorts in the same world, rather than one linear story. That might change as the books go on, but purely based on this first book, I'd say almost read the first chunk, then when the time gap happens, when it jumps through time, stop there, then read that section like the next day sort of on its own, and I think it improves the book. A train is about to go past. Moving on to the next book. Moving on to the next book, I read this one literally yesterday. I read it all in a day. It was a really quick read. Really very brutal book. I wouldn't recommend it to everyone, but if you're into sort of Finchery, serial killery, western sort of stuff, Cormac McCarthy's Child of God. It's better to do it that way. Yeah, so it's a very brutal book, and the subject matter is very disturbing. I didn't actually know what it was about when I went into it. I just picked it up because it's the only Cormac McCarthy book that's not been turned into a film, apart from Blood Meridian, which I'm definitely going to read after this. But this book is really good. The prose is great. There are some particular lines in this that I just really resonated with and thought really painted a picture for me. There's a moment where he describes an adder moving across the room like ink in a stream, and that just instantly sort of clicked visually. So the actual writing is really good. But yeah, be warned, it is disturbing. Also, I have this Picador classic, Picador printing of it, and I'm really not a fan of their sort of layout of everything. I'll try and find a page to show what I mean. Yeah, so you frequently get like double spreads like this, where it's just like, here's a chapter that's just this chunk of the page, and then the chapter ends and the next one starts halfway down the page. It just feels like there's a lot of wasted space in this book. That happens a lot. And while I enjoy that the chapters are short like that, it definitely helped with the pacing of the book. It made it, I feel like it could have been half the width and still, you know, just been easier to read. I don't know, but I really like this book. I recommend it if you like sort of serial killer stories. Hopefully that's not spoiling too much about it. But I went in completely blind and it sort of blew me away a bit. I'm definitely going to check out Blood Meridian next. Next book we have, this is a book I've been meaning to read for a long time. I got it so long ago. It came with 3D glasses, which might tell us something. These are hard to stay on. It's Brave New World by Aldous Huxley. Yeah, great book. It's a classic. I think most people have heard of it. There was a show of it recently, which I'm not interested in at all because it looks like it sort of butchers the source material. But I really love this book. Initially I was sort of hesitant on it. There was a few things where I was like, oh, this is a bit dated. But I think the overall messaging and sort of morals of this book are really interesting. There's lots of deconstruction of class systems, as well as just, well, that's gone down weirdly. Yeah, there's really interesting class system stuff going on in this book, but also just humanity and caring. I mean, you know, there's some seriously sort of psychologically disturbing things in this book that come from this idea of a perfect society. But if you've been wanting to read some old sci-fi, I do recommend this book to you. I think it's worth going in blind. I know there's a sequel book. I don't know if I'll read that, but I will definitely look into Aldous Huxley books more and try and find something else to read by him, because I did really enjoy this book. Now I need to pick up the glasses. But next we have a book that I think I heard about through PewDiePie years ago, and I sort of picked it up and maybe a month ago, 2 months ago, and so I just sat down and read it almost end to end. I think maybe it took me 2 days because it's quite a thick boy. Yeah, it's about almost a 300-page book, which isn't too bad. I think that's a nice length. But also I really love when the last sort of 5 or 6 pages are just blank, because it makes you less worried about bending the spine. But anyway, sorry, I didn't even say what the book was. Stoner, which is like a popular cult sort of book. I mean, the greatest novel you've never read, and it's John Williams, which I feel like his name is so generic that's partially why the book is so sort of cult status. But it is a great book. It's a book about a subject matter that I couldn't care less about, and yet the character is so strong and compelling that you project yourself onto him so strongly that even the smallest things to him feel like they're affecting you too. And you know, all these different events where you watch these characters grow and get old and become vicious or decrepit. Really good. I have some conflictions with the ending, only because it's a bit tropey to do that. It's definitely like one of those sort of Booker Prize books, but overall I thought it was really fantastic, and I do recommend Stoner. Yeah, there's not much to say really. I mean, it's well written, it's well formulated, and I'm definitely gonna check out the other John Williams book that is Buffalo Runs, I think. I hear that one's really good, and it's more of a western, so there's more like direct story. and I reckon someone who can write characters as well, also putting them in a more of a story, could be really great. But yeah, so Stoner. And then we got one more in the box. This is the first ever sort of proper noir book I've read, at least for a while, and I mostly really enjoyed it. I thought, it definitely follows the tropes of the genre, which is sort of the point. I really like the cover design. It's The Lady in the Lake by Raymond Carver, which is, I think, the 4th Philip Marlowe book. It definitely makes me want to read some more Marlowe books. I think The Big Sleep is very tempting at the moment. But this being one I hadn't actually heard of before, like The Big Sleep you've heard of, and one of the other ones I've heard of, because they often were adapted into movies. But I think this told a really good story, and I really immersed myself in this book. It wasn't too long a read. The mystery was decent. I mean, I sort of pieced it together in the first sort of 50 pages, and then you spend sort of 200 pages reading thinking, oh, maybe it's not going to be that, and then it sort of goes, yeah, it was that. But I'd say it's definitely worth a read if you're into mystery, noir, a man driving around smoking and drinking and fighting. Yeah, really enjoyable book. Just a great one to just pick up and go through on a weekend sort of thing. Yeah, I liked it. So the main thing that got me back into reading recently was I picked up Hollywood by Bukowski, just randomly in HMV. It was in like 2 for £6, which is a great deal. Most of these books I actually got in that deal. So yeah, so I hadn't read for years, like literally since school, which would have been like an Inspector Calls, all that sort of thing just put me way off reading. So I just picked this up sort of randomly, because I thought it would be pertinent to film in general, which it is mostly. But I sort of found myself falling in love with the writing style and the sort of dirty grimness, and just found it really funny. There's certain characters in this book that are really funny. Francois in particular is a funny character. So I sort of went on this crazy train of Bukowski after Bukowski after Bukowski after reading this one. So a lot. After that one I read Post Office, which is one of his more famous books, I think. It's one of his earliest ones as well. It's sort of a fictional biography in some sense. I think it's based on his real life, but also there's some elements where you can tell he's sort of exaggerating things and coming up with some pretty disturbing scenarios. But Post Office was really good. This was another book I read really quickly. I really enjoy his writing style, and the fact that you can sort of tell he's writing it very drunk. He certainly has an interesting take on things, an interesting view on the world. Now, whether he's PC these days, probably not, especially as he's definitely quite misogynistic in his books, which I don't necessarily think is like an active thing. It's just sort of passively there because he's very much writing through this sort of murky world. But yeah, so Post Office, I read that one, I really enjoyed that one. And then after Post Office, I picked up The Most Beautiful Woman in Town, which brings me to a short tangent quickly, just to say that these, let me feel focus on that, that's a bit small. But basically these are Virgin books published. And I don't recommend picking them up in these Virgin Books publishings because they're quite like cheap, and the covers just really don't represent the tone of the books. I really dislike the covers, especially on this one and a couple others that I haven't read yet, like Notes of a Dirty Old Man. And it's undeniable that Bukowski was misogynistic and perverted in some sense, but I don't think the cover reflects the sort of depth of emotion that he writes at the same time, especially in this book. And this book has a series of short stories. I mean, I'll show you the titles and it will sort of give you an idea of what you'd be in for. I don't recommend it to everyone. It's, it's dirty, it's grimy, it's graphic, it's sort of disgusting in many ways. I don't know if that showed the whole page, but there are certain stories in this book, some I won't say the name of. The swastika story is really good. The title story is really good. I enjoyed a good 80% of the stories in this book, but it gets very, very disturbing and very graphic. So if you're not a fan of that, if you're not prepared for that, if you don't want to read something like that, absolutely do not read this book, and absolutely do not read this story. Absolutely do not read the story The Fiend in this book. Yeah, it's one of the most disturbing short stories I've ever read. And it's hard to say it's good, but it sort of is. The sporadic, chaotic, sort of disturbing nature of Bukowski's writing is what makes it so interesting. Sometimes it's hilarious, and sometimes it sort of makes you feel sick. The Fiend is definitely one of those stories. I may even say avoid it until you've read maybe the rest of the book first, and then you'll sort of get more of the feel. There's lots of really weird stuff in this book, to be honest, and while I enjoyed it and found it funny, there are some parts that do disturb me a bit, and it is quite misogynistic, so I know that going in. But after I read that one, which I'm selling great, I read Pulp, which I have this beautiful copy of that I borrowed from a friend. Pulp is Bukowski's sort of most narrative book. It's a noir story, as you can probably tell from the cover. It sort of reminded me of The Lady in the Lake, but with maybe triple the amount of pervertedness. It's gritty and grimy and dark and funny most of the time. The characters are always sort of a little bit racist and angry in Bukowski's stories, but I really enjoyed this one. Again, it was a quick read. It's about 150 pages. As far as the actual noir elements of it, it certainly had the femme fatale and the alcoholic, cigarette smoking main man, whatever. But yes, I really enjoyed this one overall. And I think if you're going to start Bukowski, I definitely read this or Hollywood first to sort of get the feel. Yeah, so this one's really good. I was just I think Bukowski is sort of resentful of this book slightly. He said, I think he often described it as his laziest book because he sort of just sat down and pissed it out. But I really like this book, and I had a lot of fun with it. Nearly at the end, there's one more book I've read and one that I'm currently reading and having some trouble with, but the book I read end to end, and this book has easily become one of my favourite books of all time. This is the first Discworld book I've read, and it has very quickly become one of my favourite books. It is Small Gods, which is the 13th book in Discworld. I love the art on this so much. It wraps around the side. But I mean, yeah, this book was just so funny, and the characters were so interesting and fun to follow, and I sort of didn't want it to end, and then even when I thought I knew what the ending was going to be, it kept going after that point and really surprised me. This book is superb. You don't need to read any other Discworld to understand what's going on here. It's all new, it's all fresh, it's really funny. I can't recommend this book more. I really loved it end to end, and I'd recommend it to anyone, especially if you're interested in starting Discworld. I've read half of another book so far and really like it. But if you're thinking of starting, definitely start here, because this is one of the strongest books I've read in general. And yeah, it's already one of my favourites of all time. And then sort of one more book that I'm having some trouble getting through. I find it really fascinating. It's very gritty again and disturbing, almost more so than Bukowski. And that's William S. Burroughs' Naked Lunch. Being a big film fan, I love the Cronenberg film, and I hear the book is completely different, which is fine. I think Bukowski mentions in Hollywood that William S. Burroughs said that his book was butchered by the film, so I had to check out the book. Now, I'm maybe 40 pages in, and this is really difficult to read. This book is such a disjointed sort of mess of scenes. Mostly good, but it's very hard to read coherently, so I will update when I finish it, but it's taking me a while because it's sort of so confusing. I think I might have to restart it again and try and sort of read it all in one go. But yes, so that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 books reviewed. You're welcome. And I will probably start doing some movie reviews again soon. I'm just sort of getting in the swing of things. If you want to know what I've been watching, as I've been watching it, I have a very up-to-date Letterboxd account, which is the same as, same as the channel name. So head on over there, you can see films as I watch them. Other than that, I think I will at some point pick up doing some reviews again. Definitely going to focus on more sort of filmography of directors and just sort of cover a wide subject matter of every film by one director. That's sort of how I watch things. I've been watching lots of De Palma lately and lots of Cronenberg lately, so definitely expect a video on De Palma some point soon. I've got a lot of work to do, so we will see. But yeah, I've been enjoying reading a lot lately, so I think I'm going to continue to update you as I continue to read. My light just went out. Cool. Also, I'm currently reading The Outsider by Stephen King. I'm about halfway through it, and I'd say it's pretty good. I've not read a lot of King. I really want to start The Dark Tower at some point. I left my copy of The Shining at home, so I haven't actually been able to finish that. I also got about halfway through that one. But yes, so maybe I will become one of those Stephen King obsessed zealots, but we will see. And I will see you in whatever the next monstrosity I make is. I look like death right now, and I couldn't tell you why. I think it's just I was trying to use the light from the window, and it's not turned out great. I look like Voldemort. So, bye.